No. No.
Awesome. Welcome, everybody, to the 124th episode. Well, you call it episode? The 124th meeting of the Melbourne AWS user group. So, thank you all for coming. I'm Arjen Schwartz. I'm one of the organizers. You'll meet some of the others soon enough. But first, in the spirit of reconciliation, the Melbourne AWS user group acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples today. Also, if you're present here or even online really, please pay attention that we have a code of conduct. A short version of it is here. I'm not going to read all of it, but in practice it comes down to be a good person. You can read the entire one on our website. Also, to promote the bits about us more, we have a website. It's not just meetup.com, because that doesn't help much. You can also find us on LinkedIn, Mastodon, technically Twitter. We do tweet notifications and announcements on there, but as everybody's aware, Twitter is basically dying, so don't care too much about that. But the important part, of course, is what we're all here for today. Our agenda. I'm doing the boring introduction part. Nobody cares about that, but I'll have to take you through it. Then we've got a What's New section by our awesome team, most of whom here are at the front and one at the back, which is Jason, Don, and Matt. So they'll take you through all what's cool, what's new. Especially, I'm looking forward to really the thing that excites me still that we have it now, a what's new in Melbourne option. But after that, despite how much I love the what's new section, our main attraction is of course the actual talks. So we've got Itamar Amit about fine-tuning Lambda concurrency for SQSD queuing, and Joshua Baker about AD domain joining and removal for dynamic workloads in AWS. So we've got stuff for fancy serverless stuff, as well as things for that are, dare I say it, unfortunately very necessary. And at the end, we'll close up with a marketplace segment, which is our usual who's hiring, which basically means if you are looking for people to join your team, hold up your hands, wait for the microphone, give a 30-second spiel about why people should talk to you about a new job. The reason we do it this way around is simply because if you're here with your manager, it's kind of awkward if you hold up your hand for, yes, I'm looking for a new job. And we want to give everybody that option. Always, this of course depends a bit on our speakers themselves as well, but generally ask questions. What we try to do, and especially for our online community, you can ask questions in our Slack or in the YouTube channel, YouTube live stream, sorry. And we will repeat those questions for you at the end of the talk. We'll try to keep the questions at the end, mostly because it's easier for the speakers, as more often than not, a question you may have will be answered later on in the talk. If you're in the audience, same thing applies. Unless the speaker says differently, please save your questions until the end and wait for a microphone to come to you after you hold up your hand. The microphone bit is so that people on the live stream can also hear you. Of course, none of this would be possible without our sponsors. So I want to thank our gold sponsor for 2023, which is CMD Solutions, which is a great company. I happen to work for them. as well as our silver sponsors, Versant and Civo, which also great companies, our competitors. But still great companies. I know a lot of people there that are great people. Not to mention, of course, we've all seen the place where we are, which is NAB, who provide this really awesome space. It's a great space, so we're happy to be here, and thank you for that, NAB people. If you want to talk more to us, and I mentioned the Slack before as a great way to ask questions, join our Slack. The URL here is the URL here has a invite thing that you can get to join our Slack. So go there. Aside from fun discussions that are going on there every day, most days, not every day, because people want to enjoy their weekends. We've got good channels around when our outages gets really busy, when anything happens in Sydney. We haven't had anything happen in Melbourne yet, so I guess we're better than Sydney. Announcements channel, which has all of the announcements from AWS, which is a lot, as you'll see in just a few minutes. And of course, the other things. We're always looking for people to help with the meetup. So there's a bunch of us who run this, and we're happy to do so. But we also realize that people don't want to listen to us giving talks all the time, because that would get very boring very quickly. So if you want to give a talk, please reach out. We're always looking for speakers. We're also looking for volunteers on various things. I figured this month I'll give a special shout out to anyone with any design skills, because we'd love to have some more nice looking things for the meetup. And we're not good at that. I'll admit I'm not the best designer in the world. It's hard, but you know, I'm sure I range somewhere in the top 8 billion. Somewhere below my daughter, who's 2 years old. But some upcoming events. Who's going to the Sydney Summit next week? Awesome, that's a couple of people who are flying up to Sydney for a single day. Not that I'm disappointed that the summit is only one day this year instead of the 3 it used to be, but I might be. If you're not going, still I recommend signing up so you can view the live stream, and later in the month you would get access to all the recordings of the talks that are given during the summit itself. So yeah, join it and it will be good. What else do we have? If you're not going to the summit, on that exact same day, somebody decided it was a good idea to hold a meetup. We've got the data engineering meetup, which often has AWS related topics. The summaries this time didn't show anything purely AWS related, but it might still be interesting to you. And as I said, it's always a good meetup to go to. Then we've got a newcomer meetup, Kubernetes User Group Australia. It's not to be confused with the Kubernetes User Group Melbourne. Yongkang, who's standing there at the back taking a photo, is running it. If you're interested, talk to him. One of the topics will be ROSA, which is the Red Hat OpenShift something on AWS. Sorry, talk to him. I don't care. No offense, but it's not my favorite topic. Still, might be interesting to some of you to go to. And the AWS Programming and Tools Meetup is back on the 12th of April with a secure connection to EC2 instances topic by some guy named Jason Woods, who regular attendees of this meetup might recognize from talks like Systems Manager Part 1 and Systems Manager Part 2. Also on our podcast and stuff like that. And we like Jason, so definitely, if you're interested in this, come along. And with that, I will hand it over to our esteemed What's New in AWS friends to tell us all about what we really care about instead of hearing me drone on.
Hello, welcome to, there we go, the slides have reappeared. Welcome to What's New in AWS with our new and improved format of 3 people up here instead of 2.
Woo!
For 50% more general snark. I have 0 hands, so one of you two is going to have to pilot the slides.
Woo!
Melbourne.
What's new in Melbourne?
A lot of stuff.
Yes, quite a lot of things. Let's get the Kubernetes snark out of the way to start with. Amazon EKS is now live in Melbourne, so if you happen to be running Kubernetes and given the amount of snark that we heap on Kubernetes here,
Not saying anything.
given the amount of snark that we heap on Kubernetes here, kudos to you. If you're here and you're running Kubernetes workloads, you can now run those in Melbourne on Amazon EKS, rather than doing the thing that I really don't recommend you do and spinning everything up on bare metal instances. Please don't do that if you're running Kubernetes. Please use the managed version.
Yeah. And just, lots of general good stuff to come into Melbourne. I'm sure we'll start seeing lots of things coming in each session, but step functions, distributed map, good. The RDS blue-green deployments.
That was a reInvent
MySQL.
announcement, if I recall correctly, so I'm impressed they've turned that around so fast.
Yeah, because it came out not all that long ago. In sort of Sydney and other places.
The nice thing about it is, unlike what was it? 10 years ago when Sydney came online. Jeez, I'm old. Melbourne seems to be getting things at a much faster pace. AWS seem to have, gotten their stuff together around doing the fast follow of new services. If you look at the What's New the What's New RSS feed, every 3rd or 4th post is a such and such now available in new regions thing. So it's, and looking at this, like, this is 4 weeks and we've got some pretty big, storage gateway, big service, Kinesis data fire hose, big service, Kubernetes, big service. Like, these are some big things to happen in 4 weeks. So it'll be good to, they're obviously trying to get parity as soon as they can.
Yes.
And that's a good thing.
That, and they're turning around a lot of their reInvent announcements very fast, which is nice. I have heard rumors that it's about 6 to 12 months for new regions to get to the point where companies which deploy to every region can comfortably use them. So we'll see how well that holds for Melbourne.
Yeah.
Yeah, and probably one that's not on here as well. I'm not sure if it was the last month's one, but Resource Access Manager as well.
That was late last month. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that was something like the day before the meetup last month.
Yeah, so that was a really big one. So
the one call out, is the podcast out? Have we launched that? No, not yet. Not yet.
there is a podcast coming.
Yeah. When the new episode of the podcast comes out, you will hear us talk about it there as well. CloudFormation language extension transform. CloudFormation already available in Melbourne, but now we're doing announcers around sub-features of services. The takeaway from that is just because you see step functions is available in Melbourne
doesn't mean that the whole feature set
Exactly.
is available in that region. Be particularly wary of this if you're doing anything with machine learning, SageMaker.
Yeah, so like there's gonna... Unfortunately, it seems to have gotten to the point where the service availability tool, the service map, isn't going to give you all the answers. It's very much going to be go into the AWS console, enable the Melbourne region, wait, then
Deploy
go and look
things
and see what breaks.
and see whether it works.
Yeah.
Because, that's this third level of detail. We have a region, then we have the service, and now we have the sub-features of the service is going to catch people out.
Yeah, and even when I was sort of putting things together for the my talk in the programming and tools, stuff around EC2s and systems manager were not all there in Melbourne. So,
Yeah.
I had to, I started rolling things out, and then some stuff just didn't quite work.
This workshop's being run in Sydney now. This workshop's being run
Unfortunately.
The takeaway from this is if you happen to be working with people who are asking you when you can start a multi-region setup involving Sydney and Melbourne, probably not yet.
Yeah, the answer is I'll get back to you.
Yeah.
Yes, probably in 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and test. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even if it says it's there, jump in and just test the full functionality that you need. All right, and after finally in Melbourne, there's still a little.
Finally in Sydney, we can't quite obsolete this one yet. Security Lake appeared. Security Lake, I think, appeared in Sydney fairly shortly after the last meetup.
I think it was like 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, it was 2 or 3
after.
days afterwards because I was
Yeah.
looking at stuff related to Security Lake for a client. The C7G instances appearing is nice.
Yep. Getting the new the new Gravitron.
Yeah.
That's good.
They're the two big ones. App Runner, yay, another way to run containers, just what I've always wanted. And it's some more functionality for fraud detector. Sure,
So,
good thing if you're running fraud detector, I guess.
Yeah, but if you do want to do that lift and shift of everything onto Graviton, you don't have to be a series behind now, which is kind of nice.
Yeah.
yep.
So no, that's definitely the big one.
And we're just waiting for those to come in.
Well, it'll be interesting to track how long it takes things to come to Melbourne after they've been released in Sydney. So now that they're obviously playing catch up in Melbourne, but they're still releasing things in Sydney. So then how long is it going to take these 4 things to appear in the Melbourne region? And hopefully that'll give us a bit of an idea of what our lead times are looking at.
Serverless. Hey, the Lambda code scanning Lambda functions with Amazon Inspector is in preview now. That almost means that the service which I gave my very first talk here on is actually
Usable.
not just usable, but something that you can probably recommend that people should use.
Yeah, it's almost doable in production now.
It is in preview now.
Almost.
You'll be able to use it as a fully featured service in production in maybe 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6 months. Yeah.
3 to 6 months.
Yes. And unfortunately, our good friend Scott is not here for the Lambda Power Tools for .NET. So for anyone that programs in .NET, yay, you got the Power Tools now to help make things a bit easier.
And then Sam got a lot of love this month.
Yes, I am amused to see the Rust build support for SAM popping up. That's an intersection of some very specific programming communities that I'm in, which I don't think I ever expected to see on the slides here.
Yeah, that Rust is getting a lot of support from AWS in a lot of areas at the moment. It's interesting to see, the SDK is getting a lot of love, and now we've got build support in a number of areas. Rust is definitely the up-and-comer language at the moment.
Can confirm Rust has a really good community.
Yeah. Containers didn't get as much love this month.
Yes, but there's nothing related to Kubernetes here, which
Yeah,
means
it's
that we can probably tone down the snark on this one.
Yeah.
all ECS on there. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting the contextual failure reasons for task launches. As Matt was saying on the, we got the podcast coming out, and a lot of the things that we spoke about on the podcast were, quality of life fixes. So, some of these things may seem like it's not too big, but just being able to
Make life
see
that little
why.
bit easier.
Hey, it means that the ECS error messages are probably going to be more useful than the AWS documentation.
Yeah. Yeah, the error messages are actually going to mean something now, and we might actually understand what's going on. That'd be nice.
Then again, HashiCorp's error messages do make AWS look like they hire a crack squad of technical writers. So, full marks to AWS on that one.
And then, provisioning task quotas increased. Yay, I can scale my ECS workloads even faster now.
And,
Sure.
And being able to do some house cleaning for inactive task definitions. So,
Yeah. That should have
Little-
always been there.
better late than never.
Yeah.
So, networking. CloudFormation support for AWS Transfer Families AS2 capability. Always good to get CloudFormation support for more things. And it led to me finding out what AS2 was.
Hey,
So just it's a more secure way of doing file transfers.
Yeah.
this is not a bad thing. The new Direct Connect in Auckland is also not a bad thing, because I believe that marks the very early stages of what will eventually become
Yeah.
the
an
Auckland
instance in Auckland.
Yeah.
Or an environment in Auckland.
Yes,
Yeah.
the Auckland region, I believe it's going
Yeah.
to be eventually. That's very nice for people in New Zealand who no longer have to deal with the latency of running everything to Australia over the public internet. Actually much more worthwhile. If people are talking to you about latency-related reasons for doing multi-region, if you're in Australia, probably don't bother. But if you're in New Zealand, here's a compelling solution which might actually reduce latency problems here. I still maintain that the main use case for this is East Coast and West Coast US.
Yeah. Prefix lists. Yay. 2 additional regions, and Melbourne's not one of them. How hard is it to give me a list of your own IP addresses? I'm surprised that this is a thing that yeah. Another reason not to run prod in Melbourne just yet.
Lots of cross-region love for RDS. MySQL, SQL Server.
Also, version 15 for Postgres. That's nice. Following on with the trend of managed cloud provider versions of everything being always one version behind what you can get if you install, I will expect Postgres 16 to be released any day now.
That's kind of the indicator. And Aurora Serverless v1 getting some love. Be nice if I could define maintenance windows for v2. Just saying. Just
Do bear in mind that as per the talk that we had here a little while ago.
2 months, 3 months?
No, it was late last year. Aurora Serverless v1 and Aurora Serverless v2 are essentially completely different products.
Yes.
So do bear that in mind if you're trying to do anything related to Aurora Serverless. It might catch you out.
Lots in security.
Security. This is where I get to do a whole lot of talking. And in the spirit of things which should always have been there, application load balancers now support TLS 1.3. That's not even 12 months late. That's what? 3 to 4 years late at this point.
Yeah. But hey, compliance teams will be happy. We can actually do that now.
Yeah.
Yay!
About time. The KMS supporting FIPS 142 enabled interface VPC endpoints is a series of words which probably means absolutely nothing to people who
Don't live.
who don't either live in security or collect AWS certifications, but does mean that your compliance teams are likely to be slightly happier with you doing things through VPC endpoints if you choose to do it that way.
And yeah, the listing tools for testing the billing and cost management permissions. I mean, if any of you have been into your billing console recently, you'll seen the little box at the top saying, "Hey, we're changing the way that doing permissions now." Here's sort of a tool to make checking that a lot easier.
The last one that I would probably pull off here is the guard duty for Amazon Aurora now being generally available. That's another one that's probably in the spirit of why wasn't this here the
Here a
whole
while ago.
time?
Yeah.
Because guard duty for standard RDS has been a thing for quite a while.
Yeah.
I actually thought that was already a thing. I was
Yeah.
very, very surprised to see that on the slides. And then realised that it's probably a very good thing that I've never deployed anything in Aurora, given that that wasn't a thing up until now.
DevOps.
Corretto 20. Yay!
Is Chris on the live stream?
What was the one? Oh, yeah, it's the CloudWatch Internet Monitor, now GA. So that's handy for anyone that was, checking out what was going on with things. Previously you'd been able to check how your networks were going internally, but this now gives you an idea of, what's the internet into AWS looking like. So if users are having issues, this now gives you a way to sort of rule out or point to internet issues.
There's a progress tracker for Control Tower, which is still not the Control Tower related announcements that I want to see.
The bigger thing there is the Control Tower shouldn't really need a progress tracker, but
Yes, I was going
we're
to
kind of
say
fixing the wrong side of the equation.
Yes,
there,
we haven't made this tool any more usable. We've just made it so that you can
See how slow it is.
Which, for something that I regularly come up here and say I still can't advise people in good faith to use this in production systems, is not a ringing endorsement.
Yeah, code build, smaller machine types. Well, for a GPU, yay! If you're using code build, I guess. DevOps Guru, nice to see that they're still expanding that one. Customer-defined metrics in CloudWatch run. That's a nice one. I like being able to define my own metrics.
Yeah, that is good.
Definitely.
Hate to think how expensive it's going to get, but hey, we can live with that. And then I'd be remiss if I did. Did I put? Oh, I didn't put the Connect reference on there. That's okay.
No, but I will say that I think that some of the most interesting things the most interesting announcements in what's new this month are actually on this slide. So I'm going to pull out 3 to begin with, and I know that the 2 of you are going to add more. Cost anomaly detection now automatically configured for all users.
Yep.
That's another one which goes straight into the bucket of why wasn't this the case the whole time, but it's brilliant that it's now a thing. Resource Explorer supporting 12 new resource types.
Always good.
Yeah, after the lack of basic, or the holes in some of the fundamental security features, lack of discoverability has always been one of the biggest pain points that I've found with AWS. So the fact that Resource Explorer is now addressing that, particularly Lambda and SQS being basically backbones of any serverless workload, and the S3 adding loads of new features, I don't think... Matt, you wrote that description. I don't think that does that justice.
Yeah, so I've been automating the process for generating these slides, and it tried to stick like 7 S3 announcements on this slide.
Yeah.
And so I sort of had to go in and go,
Day.
yeah, that's not quite going to work. Yeah, Pi Day this year, that went a little crazy. That went a little
S3 everything.
Yeah.
S3, all the things. Like I've put Mount Point there because that was the one that got a lot of love in the social media. It still feels like a really bad idea to me to mount an S3 bucket as a file system.
Yeah.
But
But that's probably the one that bears calling out, because that's kind of Here Be Dragons territory. If you don't know what you're doing, it is going to be very easy to horribly shoot yourself in the foot with Mount Point. If you do know what you're doing, I can certainly see use cases for this, but this is the sort of feature where I'm concerned that, a lot of people are going to decide that this is the solution to all of their problems.
If you haven't read the documentation and you don't understand the behavior of acid, you could very quickly,
This is a reminder for everyone. Hopefully most people here don't need it. S3 is object storage, and the file system, insofar as it displays in S3, is an artifact of the way that AWS stores things. S3 is flat object storage. Any objects in a bucket, the file paths are just
names.
There.
Yep.
They're just names. In terms of how the data is actually stored, they mean absolutely nothing. So if you have some sort of situation where you really need to do this, please make sure that you know what you're doing, and please understand S3 is object storage.
Read the documentation first.
Being able to mount it as a file system doesn't change that. I really want to emphasize that, because this is going to be one of those features which is going to cause endless rants on social media.
Yeah.
And at least one thing though, so at the moment Mount Point's just read only, so people can't write stuff back to it
Yet.
And Linux only at the moment too. But yeah,
that's right. You should only be running
definitely
Linux in the cloud anyway.
Definitely, you should be aware of where to use block storage and where to use object storage.
And where to use file storage. If you need a true file system, you are looking for EFS. You are not looking for S3.
Or FXS.
Or FSX.
If you're unlucky enough to be running Windows.
In general, if you need the general purpose file system, EFS is what you want. Please do not mistake Mount Point as an alternative for that. It's not
2.5 cents a gig file storage.
No.
Is the gist.
No.
There. Is the gist. The one for me that I must have missed the announcement last year, Application Composer.
Yeah.
General availability. That's definitely making it on my Easter. No, it's not. I'm a dad now. I don't get to do those things anymore.
Yes.
Who am I kidding? I'm never getting to play with any of this stuff ever again.
You.
Somebody else can play with that.
The trade-off of giving up all of your free time to be able to play with small people.
But apparently, Application Composer very cool.
Oh yes. That was one of the reInvent announcements that when I was there, a lot of people were talking about it. It was being discussed in a lot of hallways. It was also discussed in a lot of recaps.
And just to sort of cycle back a little bit, on the Resource Explorer, for anyone that hasn't had a look at it, go check it out and turn it on. It'll just give you a view of all your resources that you've got. Well,
it
all
will
of the
give you a
supported.
view of all of the resource types that AWS supports, which is not yet the same thing. But yes, I do remember, because my first encounter with clouds was Azure, I do remember turning on AWS for the first time and being incredibly disappointed at how poor the general discoverability of things was. I have spent many a day trawling through exports from AWS config, trying to work out exactly what was running where in accounts that were subject to compliance restrictions. So actually getting Resource Explorer to a point where it's starting to surface most of the common resource types that people use is a huge deal.
Yep, definitely.
And then the last one, the very, very last one, because in the theory of I didn't realize this didn't already exist. In SES, you can now see how many emails you received. Yay!
And on that bombshell, that's probably a good point to wind it up and hand back over.
Done.
Thanks for putting up with us.
Yeah, apparently the theme of this month is features that we thought were already there.
Thank you, Dawn, Jason, and Matt. I'm looking forward to running my WordPress site on S3 now. With that good news, let's move on to our first main topic of the day. Itamar Amif is the head of architecture at Illuvium.io, where he's living his childhood dream of making video games, which I can only say is awesome. We all would want to do that. I'll be honest, I would love to make video games. I just have no skills for that. So, Itamar, if you I'll give you this one.
Actually try and this, see if I go to the right screen.
No, it should be our cable, but their dongle is what we've got.
Nope, definitely.
Not happy. Good question, okay.
Yep. Oh.
Alright, let me go and see what's happening at the other end.
I need to do some tap dancing in the meanwhile. Get there.
So, while we're waiting, insert technical difficulties screen here. Just want to do, again, a shout out for, hey, we're always looking for speakers. The other thing I forgot to mention when I did the earlier introduction is we'd also love to have feedback on how we run the meetup. If there's things you would love to see that we're not doing, or things that you would like to see changed. I can't promise that we'll do anything you say, but we're happy to listen to what you're saying, because we're here for all of you. So anything that you think can be an improvement in any particular area, we'd love to hear that. So in that case, reach out to any of us. That's any of the people you've seen here in front so far, except maybe Itamar. Don't bother him with meetup stuff, please. He's a great guy, but I don't think he wants to deal with that. Yep. Be all positive about what he is talking about, but not about what he doesn't care about. So reach out to any of us. Just, hey, this could be better. could be anything from I don't like the food, or why don't I get food when I look at it on YouTube from my home. The answer is because you're not here, which should be obvious, but you know. So yeah, that's a good thing. Hoping technical difficulties were finished by now, so that I don't run out of things to think. Okay, it's actually working now. So, yep. 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 As Jason says, very friendly topic. Talk to us if you have anything. Well, if you're a first-time speaker, talk to us. We're happy to help you build your slide deck, even just to get you used to things. Would it be easier if we send it to my laptop? Can you? If you can, title. Cool. Yeah, that might be easier. Joshua, would you mind doing your talk first while we sort out these issues, technical difficulties? That means I'll be with, if you can go to that. That means I get to introduce Joshua Baker first. Joshua is a motivated and ambitious DevOps engineer with over 7 years of experience focused on product delivery, cloud architecture, and customer success. Highly skilled in PowerShell and Python automation, DevOps continuous integration. And I was going to call out Dawn about cursing earlier, but I'll have to do it again. Azure and AWS environments. Why would you? Azure. Come on. You had it in your bio. Why would you put that in your bio for a meetup like this? I expect it from. So, if we're good to go, I'll hand it over to you. And yep, that seems to all be working. So, give a hand for Joshua.
Okay, hello, can you hear me? Awesome, great. All right, yes, so, no, I don't want a personal hotspot. yeah. Okay, hello. All right, yep, hello, my name's Josh, and today we'll be talking to you about an interesting topic that I came across with one of our customers, where we had some dynamic workloads that needed to be domain joined. And that comes with its own form of problems, which we'll discuss, and then also run through how I approach the problem and then the ultimate solution to this. Of course, this will also work for non-dynamic workloads, but it gets more interesting when you use auto-scaling. Okay, so just a very quick introduction about myself. I'm a chartered IT professional, senior DevOps engineer working for AC3. I think that's another competitor to Vicent and CMD Solutions. You can find me on LinkedIn at the link there. Okay, now that the cheesy self mugshot is out of the way, we'll run through the agenda. So we're going to first understand what this problem is, hopefully in depth, so that you can then understand where I'm coming from and why the solution was done in a certain way. We'll also just quickly review the options that we have for Active Directory in AWS. I'll then show you the solution and then the use cases that it can apply to. We'll move on to improvements, and I'll also just show you how much this is going to cost, and I get the feeling you might be blown away at how little this will cost you. And of course, we'll leave the questions towards the end. Okay, so let's first look at what you've got for your options in Active Directory in AWS. First, you've got the fully fledged managed service, which is the Managed Microsoft Active Directory, and that's everything you ever need for Active Directory in AWS. The brilliance of it is it's managed service, 2 domain controllers, separated by availability zones, completely managed, no worries. The other option is to use Simple AD. This isn't quite a full-fledged Active Directory service. Instead, it's more of a standalone Samba 4 implementation of Active Directory, but it works all the same, and it works best if you're a small to medium-sized company. There's different limits on the objects that are available in both of these implementations, and they differ greatly. For Simple AD, I think it's around 5,000 objects, whereas with Active Directory Managed Services, you have 30,000 for the standard implementation, and then 500,000 for the fully fledged enterprise solution. In the other stream, you've got customer managed, which is obviously, as we all know, run your own EC2, get your own domain controllers, load them up, manage them yourself. Also, not a bad way to go. All right, so let's look at this problem. Lots of words here. I'll just break it down for you nice and easy. Just imagine you've got an application or any kind of workload really, and it has any of the following requirements. Kerberos authentication, access to network file shares, Active Directory might already be installed or available in the environment. The application is only Windows based. So these are fairly common. There's a lot of .NET or C# applications out there that run on Windows workloads only. Certainly for our customer and the solution that I was solving, they did. You might also want to utilize some of the benefits of autoscaling. It's not a requirement here, but again, I'll show you how it adds into the flexibility of the solution towards the end. Obviously, with autoscaling, you're going to get all of the benefits of that: fault tolerance, availability, and cost management way better than non-autoscaled. Okay, so 2 approaches: serverless, server-based. Both can be automated, but one is a little more flexible, one is just in time, and has almost no management required. It's also a lot more cost efficient, so we're going to go with the serverless approach here. Right, let's look at a diagram of this scenario here. This is where we have Bastion users who are needing access to a workload in AWS. And let's say this workload has to be domain joined because those Bastion host users need to use their domain credentials or a separate domain credential. How do you do this when you've got a directory already available and they need to securely do this? With autoscaling, you have to then also manage the lifecycle of the instance. So you've got the instance launching, the instance termination. You've got to work around this. Maybe your security team has said to you, Bastion hosts need to be recycled every 1 day, maybe once a week. This is going to cause a lot of problems for you if you ever need the domain joined instance. This is the life cycle that we'll be working through. We'll go through launch. We need to join the domain. We need to then terminate the instance after it needs to be recycled, and then obviously remove it from the domain. So what can we use? We'll be using solution architecture, which is completely serverless. So that's the Amazon Event Bridge, some SSM associations, And thankfully, AWS comes up with a very nice SSM association which you can use that joins instances to the domain automatically for you. But you will need a custom SSM document to automate the removal process. There is no AWS managed document, and this is where it gets a little tricky for anyone who's new to this. Okay, so this is the solution that we ended up implementing for our customer. There are some drawbacks which we'll go through in the improvement section, but I just want to let you know this has been working very well for a number of about 20 instances are spun up and recycled within about 2 to 3 weeks. So the life cycles are short, but also are able to join and be unjoined from the domain fairly easily. So let's have a look. We've got Amazon Event Bridge. That's where the first event is going to be captured in the event bus, and that's going to trigger instance launch where user data can call the first joining document. That's the SSM association AWS join directory service domain. That will then join the domain, the instance to the domain, get that all connected up, and then place it into an in-service state. You've got everything you need there for the instance to be used and accessed. Those Bastion users are ready to go. But then you need to terminate the instance and manage that life cycle. So at instance terminating, you'll then go send that event off to EventBridge automatically. That'll be picked up and trigger the custom document that we'll create. Custom document will then do 2 very important things. 1, remove the instance from the domain. And 2, remove the SSM association. That needs to be deleted because there is a limit within AWS which we ended up hitting. It's 2,000 active associations per region per account. And it's very good. We found this out through our testing process, which was lovely. But also, yeah, you just want to make sure you're also tidying up those associations, because if you don't, in that custom SSM document, and you just remove the instance from the domain, you're going to hit that limit pretty quickly. All right, so I did mention there are some improvements that could be made here. One of which is, unfortunately, using the serverless model, we can't clean up the objects that are left in AD after an instance is removed from the domain. They are removed, and doing so disables the AD object. This will then sit within AD and any OU that you set up. I think typically it stays within the computer OU that it stayed in or was created in. So that's, I have a solution for, but it's not serverless. Then we also want to extend the capability of this to customer managed AD solutions, because I know a lot of people will probably like to run their own AD implementations or domain controllers within their environments. And rightfully so. There's a little more flexibility there. And typically, if you've got sysadmins or someone working on the domain, they'll need access and be working within those environments anyway. Okay, so we've had a look at one use case, and that is, of course, the jump box or Bastion host. But you could also use it for what our customer was doing, which was a dynamic workload. They had an application which I'm not entirely sure why, but it did need domain joining and access some file stores. You could also use it for temporary workstations. Maybe a knockoff implementation of AWS workstations or workspaces, where you spin up instances in an auto-scaling group, provision users, give them access, and then tear it down at the end of the day. Okay, let's have a look at some cost options. You'll see the number there, $2.95. If you published 100,000 events, which triggered 100,000 automations that took 100,000 seconds, your current charges would be $2.95. It's very, very cheap to run this sort of implementation, and significantly so. I mean, you can't even run a micro instance that you'd be able to run a PowerShell script or something within group policy startup scripts to complete this for the same. So it's pretty good. That is, I believe, the end of my talk. I will just mention that this doesn't have to be implemented within an auto-scaling group. So if you're thinking, oh, this might not work for my workload, you can still add this just as part of your user data process, and then still add the event bridge event rule to trigger the custom SSM document to remove the instance from the domain. Okay, that's all. Does
Thank
anyone
you,
have any
Joshua.
questions?
Anybody have questions?
I got a probably very silly question. So how many customers running on AWS are actually using Azure AD? I mean, just any indication. Did you see any customers using that way?
Yeah, I've got at least 2 that I know of within our business that we have. Yep.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can add to that. There's quite a few companies that use Azure AD as their backend. Any other questions from people? Or was Josh's talk that awesome that nobody has any questions? Well, cool. Oh, somebody.
Is this open sourced? Is it available somewhere if I wanted to go and use this to go and steal those templates and everything you've written?
I have written a blog post, which you can find on AC3's website. It doesn't reference the SSM document, I'm afraid. However, if you talk very nicely to me, maybe in LinkedIn, I can provide you with that. Yeah.
Awesome, thanks.
Cool. Oh, one more.
Hi. Just in regards to the Bastion hostbox, was a caveat only to admin users, or did you have to install desktop services and licensing for that?
So in our implementation, we had a separate use case, which we used autoscaling for, where they had RDS installed, where then they were able to access and use terminal servers within the environment. That works quite well. That is another kettle of fish, which I'm not willing to get into now. Yeah, Windows licensing is very interesting. Yeah. But with respect to the admin users, this particular implementation didn't lock down the users for the way that we've used the solution. They needed everyone to be able to access. Of course, you could control that with a group policy object or something which you'd have to configure outside. Yeah. Again, one of my biggest problems with the AWS managed AD solution is you still need some sort of domain joined instance to then access the AD users and computers. Yeah. Yeah. That's okay though.
That's good. Thank you.
Anybody else, or that's it? Cool. Then thank you very much, Joshua.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. So just for the record, I'm used to holding a water bottle and not used to holding a mic. So when I eventually just try and drink from this, please don't laugh too hard. Cool. So today I'm going to talk about a topic which I think is super interesting. Everyone talks about how you can scale your serverless infrastructure up and up and up. And we had to control it so it wouldn't do exactly that. Turns out it's a little bit harder than we thought. So a little bit about myself. I do not come from a gaming background. This is my first gaming job. I work mostly in fintechs and small startups. I did a lot of algorithmics and optimization, so finance got me happy. And then blockchain gaming happened, and suddenly, hey, this is almost financial. People need my skill set, so I moved to gaming. So it's not too late for anyone. You too can join the gaming revolution. Just sell your soul to the blockchain industry. So a little bit about Illuvium, where I've been for the last couple of years. The AAA gaming studio. They have 3 products, which means 3 games, and these 3 games, they're all cool. I don't have screenshots because I got them at the last minute. But these 3 games have items in them. One is a city building game, one is an auto battler, another is like a really impressive exploration game. And the items you receive in these games, they're NFTs because blockchain, and these are interchangeable across the game. So you can pick an item in one game, use it in another. All very, very cool stuff. More relevant to this talk about Illuvium is that we're completely serverless. Also, we're all .NET C#. Don't hate us. There is none in this presentation. I hear there is some bad blood here. But all serverless. It was a very reasonable decision. I still think it is for most small businesses. We have a small team, so not having to pay for operational costs, not having to have SREs, ensuring someone else wakes up at 1 a.m. when the server goes down, because our code is never going down. And of course, scaling, right? We are working in an industry which is very fickle. It can be controlled by trends, both gaming and blockchain. So it's really good to know that we can scale out really, really, really fast. And also, when we have an event, the day after, we want to scale in. And it's also good that we don't have to pay for that because it's all serverless. It's all managed. It's all good. So what I actually want to talk about today is the problem that we encountered with our key third-party provider. So I said we mint NFTs. We do it through the company Immutable X. They're really cool, based in Sydney. And they are the ones who are responsible for our actual minting. So they provide us with the API endpoint, with the HTTP endpoint that we post to. We post a body that says, hey, mint us some items, and it happens. And as I said, we have multiple products, and we're trying to get all of these products to mint into the same endpoint. So it makes sense, serverless. We have an SQSQ on one end, and we have IMX on the other end, and something in between. And that something is the meat here. Because usually you go, again, we have serverless, we have something, we have an SQS, just go, fire. Try and hit that endpoint as fast as you can, as often as you can, scale out as needed. It didn't really work out for IMX. As I said, our traffic is very irregular, and sometimes we need to mint thousands of items per minute, and sometimes we really don't. Turns out IMX don't like being hit for thousands of requests all of a sudden. So we talked to them and said, oh, cool, this is really, really simple. In order to get the best return on investment, the fastest minting rate, all you have to do is have at most 2 concurrent requests at any point in time and 500 items per request. And we thought, this is really, really easy. What's the problem? We can do this. Turns out it wasn't that easy. Remember, we're completely serverless, and we are very adamant about it. It means that, well, this, for example, could be solved really easily with an EC2 instance with 2 just processes running on it. We didn't want this. We didn't want to deal with another unit of deployment. We didn't want to deal with something else to log. We didn't want to deal with something which was completely outside of scope of expertise. We said, let's just solve it in a serverless way. Okay, and now my least favorite slide of this talk. This talk was submitted on the morning of January 12th, 2023, and this was very, very relevant back then. Later in that day, AWS pulled a sneaky on us and released a feature toggle on Lambda saying max concurrency. And this whole conversation became a little bit moot because you said max concurrency equals 2, and this works. But prior prior to that point in time, this talk was super, super, super relevant. Yeah. I still decided to give it because there's still a lot of, it's a bit of a deep dive about the interaction and about what's happening behind the scenes. I know it's very convenient to say, like, oh, we'll just set a configuration and just hope it works. But I think this covers a lot of stuff that would be really useful for people who deal with this to know. So here I am. But yeah, just to everyone all the time, if you're using a managed service, ensure you're staying up to date, ensure you're reading all the news, test your assumptions all the time, make sure they're still correct and still, I mean, it's not your code, you don't know the update cadence on it, make sure things are still as you expect them to be. Okay, so what we started building first, our first attempt at having a controlled scale, as in max 2 concurrent executions, was this. I actually came from an Azure background, funnily enough, and I assumed that there is complete feature parity, so I just Googled for the first thing that says concurrency and used it. And the first thing was reserved concurrency, which the first line on the page, which is as far as I got reading it, says, reserved concurrency guarantees the maximum number of concurrent instances for the function. I'm like, cool, awesome, that's exactly what I need. Set reserved concurrency to 2. Another property that you can set on lambdas is the batch size, which is as they dequeue SQS messages, what is the batch size they're trying to get to. That's an attempt. You also set what's called a batch window, which is how long they're trying that for. So for example, if you set batch size of 1 second and batch window of 1 second, batch size of 500, it will try and read up to 500 messages for 1 second. If it takes more than 1 second, it just takes whatever it can get. If it reaches 500, it will just do that. But we didn't want to have that 1 second because it sounded bad. Like, why would we ever wait? If you have batch size larger than 10, it has to be at least 1 second. So here we go. That was the trade-off. So just in show of hand, who knows why this is going to crash and burn terribly once we deploy it? No one. This is a very relevant talk. Excellent. So in order to explain the problem as to why this doesn't going to work, I need to briefly cover Lambda concurrency. And hopefully me moving to another computer wouldn't break my animation. It didn't. Excellent. So every single account has a Lambda concurrency limit. And that's the number of Lambdas that can run concurrently in a given account in a single region. It's set to 1,000 by default. You can increase it, I think, yourself by a bit. If you get in touch with AWS support and ask really nicely and showcase that you really have to increase it, you can get it boosted further up. But what it means is that you have 1,000 slots pretty much, or 20 in this user's case, because that's how many I thought would look good on a page. And you can run 20 concurrent lambdas. So if, for example, I have an SQS trigger which gets processed, that's one of my slots taken. If I have API gateway triggering lambda, that's another one taken. As my request finished processing on API gateway, I get this back in my pool. As my SQS message finished processing, I get that back. All is good. What's not good is when they're all taken. When all your slots are taken, when you've reached your concurrency limit because you have 1,000 running lambdas at the same time, when you try and spin another lambda, you get throttled. And that means that the runtime throws a throttling error, and your operational team just calls you because it's 3 a.m. and some woke them up and they want to talk to you. Not good. Don't reach this limit. Avoid it as possible. And how is this related to our reserved concurrency? So as I said, reserved concurrency is a property of an SQS subscription for a Lambda. And what it does is it takes this huge, completely unreachable limit of 1,000 on your account and partitions it off. It says, these two lambdas, these two lambda concurrencies, these two slots, they are now allocated exclusively for this one trigger. So firstly, nothing outside of your account can now use these two. These are always allocated to this one account, so it's a guaranteed maximum. But it also means that that's all your Lambda can ever use. And when, do I have the animation? Great. So what happens when these two are in case, right? So we have our Lambda connected to SQS, and we start receiving messages, and we receive one message and we process it, and receive a second message and we process it, and then we receive a third message, and the runtime goes, I have another message, I want to process it, but I already have, two things running, I'll boot up a third one. So what's actually taking place is that the runtime doesn't go, oh no, I'll stop at 2 because that's my configured concurrency. The runtime goes, oh, I want to spin another one, but I can't because I've reached my limit. All we did was lower the cap. We didn't actually told the runtime to not try and go any higher. We told it, throw a really nasty exception that makes everyone unhappy when you reach it. So not great. And again, there is a bit of an issue with scalability here because if, for example, you have 500 of these lambdas all taking like 2 slots each, then you can't do any other thing with any other lambdas because you exhausted your capacity. So not a great idea. That's not what this feature was meant to be used for. We realized that very fast. So what we actually have my slides with issues. So not scalable because you cannot have too many of them. Lots of throttling errors, which makes people unhappy. And the other really not great thing is that there is a certain behavior of the runtime where by default, it would always assume that you can scale up to at least 5. So if you have lots of messages coming in, it would grab 5 batches of messages from SQS and would start allocating them to running lambdas. And if it doesn't have any running lambdas, it would scale up to add more running lambdas. And if you said, hey, max concurrency equals 2, sorry, reserved concurrency equals 2, it would say, oh, but I have these 3 batches that I can't scale up any lambdas for, and would just go, all right, guess I'll throw them away now. And it doesn't actually throw them away, it returns them to the queue, but the queue has a certain redrive policy. In our case, it was 3 attempts. And so 3 attempts, these perfectly fine requests, which did nothing wrong except for being grabbed and not handled, end up in a deal queue. Bad times. So we needed another piece of the puzzle, right? We needed to work out what else can we use in our serverless world, because EC2 instances are bad for us. And what can we do in order to resolve this? And then we found out about FIFO queues. So word of warning to people with OCD, don't use FIFO queues. You have to rename them in such an inconsistent manner. You have to call them a .FIFO, and you cannot use dots in other queue names. Makes me very upset all the time. But other than that, great product. So as the name says, they are first in, first out queues. If in a normal queue, you have some guarantees, such as at least once delivery, in FIFO queue, you also have a guarantee for order, as in the order in which the messages come in is the order the messages come out. And better yet, it doesn't have to be the exact order. You can use what's called messaging groups. So you can partition your queue into some partitions, and you guarantee the order within each partition, but not otherwise. And why we care about this in this context is because we found out that when you attach a FIFO queue to a Lambda trigger, the Lambda only scales up to the number of different partitions on the FIFO queue. And that's super useful because it's very easy to just create a queue with 2 partitions, and then you have guaranteed 2 consumers. Super useful, and here is how we assembled it into what we call Mark II. So again, we have all of our Lambda messages, all of our mint messages on the left in SQS. We push them through a Lambda that all it does is reads a message, assigns a message group ID of either 0 or 1, roughly evenly distributed, so they are balanced, put them into a FIFO queue, and then we have another Lambda listening on the FIFO queue and publishing them. And this cannot possibly scale up beyond 2, because the runtime knows that if it will have any more than 2 Lambdas, it cannot guarantee the ordering of them. And even though we don't care about the ordering, we get what we wanted. Again, this one was not great. If the last one was deployed and then failed, we couldn't even deploy this one for what now we know is obvious reasons. We set the batch size of our FIFO trigger to 500. That's not supported. The max batch size for a FIFO trigger is 10, which is a little less than the 500 we were hoping for. So we said, hey, look, we don't care. Like, all we care about is the trigger, right? As soon as we get them as a trigger, let's let the Lambda just keep on pulling messages from the FIFO queue. Like, nice, easy. Also, no, the FIFO queue guarantees that messages would be processed in order, which means that while the Lambda has lists on some messages for that group, no one else, including that Lambda, can read any more messages. So that didn't work either, and we need to go one step further and create Mark III. So Mark III, this is a simplified version. Our actual version had so much error handling and checks and DL queues going into other queues. This was me going, all right, what's actually important here? And that's pretty much it. So again, from the left, starting with our SQS, with all of our Mint messages, we push it into a new lambda called the forwarding lambda. Every time the forwarding lambdas receive a batch of messages, it pushes them into the holding queue at the top. And once it does, it puts one message, one trigger on the FIFO queue. And that triggers queue is just holding arbitrary messages that are empty. They just have a message group ID of 0 or 1, roughly evenly distributed. And our processing lambda, which has a batch size of 1, picks one of these messages and then goes, all right, it's my time to shine. We know we only have 2 of these running, up to 2 at any given point in time because, hey, it's a FIFO queue with 2 partitions. And that lambda just keeps on grabbing messages from the holding queue. So it does so until it hits 500 messages or until it hits some cutoff, just like the runtime would have done it. And then finally, it can take the batch, put it on, and post it to our IMX endpoint. This looks simple. Again, it's lots of blood, sweat, and tears went into this. Now, when we deploy this to our UAT environment and start testing it, we start simulating some bad cases in which Mint requests fail. And when Mint requests are failing, we saw like huge slowdowns. And in order to understand why, I have the slightly ugly diagram in here, and I apologize for it, but flowcharts are hard. So I think it's important that people work with SQS, understand the lifecycle of messages on it. So we start at the top where it says available, right? So a message is placed on the queue, and at this point in time, it is available for consumers to read it. Once someone asks for messages from the queue, the message is checked against the redirect policy. If it has been seen too many times, it goes to the DL queue. Otherwise, it is the reader effectively gains lease on this message, and it is considered in flight. Now, despite in flight sounding really majestic, it's not going anywhere, it's not flying anywhere. It simply means that it is still in the queue, still at the front of the queue. It is just marked as currently being read. So super important concept is visibility timeout, which is how long does a consumer have a lease on this message. So once a message is in flight, it can go in one of 2 ways. Either it is successfully handled, and the consumer says, yep, cool, this is handled, I'm happy, and the message just gets deleted. Or something else happens, and it becomes available again. And becomes available again is a nice way of saying the consumer failed to process it. So when would that happen? There are 3 cases. One is if we hit the visibility timeout. Right, so the consumer was given by default 30 seconds to acknowledge that they processed the message. If they fail to do that, then the queue assumes that the consumer is not coming back. It abandoned, went to grab milk, never going to come back, and the message becomes available again. When you could use Lambda and use the Lambda runtime, if the Lambda throws an exception that is not handled by your code, then the runtime acknowledges that and makes the message available immediately. And if the consumer, whatever that might be, Lambda or otherwise, manually releases the message by setting the visibility timeout to 0, then the message becomes available again. In all of these cases, obviously, the read count on this message is incremented, which means that after X number of attempts, it will go to the DL queue. What's really missing from this list, which caught us by surprise, is batch item failure. So for those of you who aren't familiar, when you read messages using lambdas from an SQS queue, you can set the error mode to batch item failure. And if you do, it gives you this superpower of giving your lambda the ability to return a payload saying, out of the batch of messages I've just tried processing, some were processed correctly and some weren't. And when your lambda does that, the lambda runtime goes, oh, all these messages were processed correctly, great, I'm gonna delete them. This is good, this is the behavior you want. but all the messages that you just explicitly stated were not processed correctly, the runtime doesn't do anything with them. It just waits. So some 30 seconds later, by default, these messages get returned to the available state because they weren't acknowledged as being processed. But for us, we assume that explicitly telling the runtime that, hey, these messages failed to process would immediately make them available. The fact it didn't meant that we were waiting for something to be another 30 seconds for something to be processed, which was a bit silly. We did not enjoy the waiting time. Specifically, this was in one of our attempts, in one of the unspecified versions that didn't make it to the slides. We were using FIFO queues for more than that. And when a message failed processing on a FIFO queue, and we said, hey, cool, this failed, runtime, please do what you do best. The runtime didn't do what it did best and did nothing instead, which meant that for 30 seconds we couldn't process any messages. Because as I said previously, you can only get other messages if all current in-flight messages in the FIFO queue are handled. By the way, in terms of solution, what we ended up doing here was implementing some middleware layer that whenever our function returned a partial success or partial failure, that middleware released the message explicitly. This is just ties back to what I said at the very start. Always test your assumptions. This is behavior that we don't believe is a feature, and potentially, since I wrote this, this was fixed. So it's the kind of thing that if you rely on, let's call it not a feature in AWS, do test those assumptions regularly. Do get in touch with AWS and ask them about it, because you don't want to be, this, for example, is just an optimization, and when it does get fixed, our middleware wouldn't care, but maybe you're relying on something which would be somewhat critical if it does get modified. Cool, so I just want to end with life after 12th of Jan. So all of this great code that we wrote, all of these additional lambdas and SQS and infrastructure just to control concurrency becomes a whole lot less relevant when you can literally say, hey, max concurrency is to batch size 500, which is exactly what we have in production at the moment. We did end up with a lot of lessons and great wiki pages describing all sorts of potential things you can build. So it wasn't all wasted, but yeah, a whole lot less exciting. One last thing, for some reason, max concurrency can only be set to a value between 2 and 1,000, which means that if you need a single consumer, which we happen to, we still use FIFO queues for that. And I would say that that's a very reasonable thing to do. If you need more than 1,000 concurrent consumers, and definitely just exactly this number, I don't know how you would solve it, but I would love to come to your talk when you explain to me how you did that. Cool, and that's me. Thank you. Before we jump into questions, just a bit of self-promotion, if I may. As was mentioned, Summit is on next week. Me and Brendan in the crowd would be there on stage. If someone is there and wants to say hi or just watch us on the live stream, that'd be great. Talk about a little bit more about the Illuvium story, and it's a good one. Cool.
Awesome. I'm sure that I'm sure all of us who will be at the summit, which is hopefully more than just you and I, will be there. So, any questions? Nothing. Nobody has questions about solving a difficult issue that then gets spoiled by AWS being rude enough to deploy a feature a couple months late.
How dare they? I would just say, though, again, these things that caught us by surprise, if you find yourself having issue with SQS or Lambda, reach out. I mean, this is something that it's code that we've thrown away, but we learned a lot, so might as well share this teaching and ensure that other people don't waste time.
Yep. Cool. If there are no questions, Itamar, thank you very much.
Cool. Thank you.
And that brings us to almost the end of the evening. Just our marketplace segment. As I mentioned at the start, this is really for if you are looking to hire people. Please raise your hand. This is probably a very good time to hire people because a lot of people aren't. And we've all seen, at least in the US, that a lot of people are suddenly looking for jobs. So if you're looking, raise your hand and somebody will bring you a microphone to give a spiel for why people should come to you. That is a...
Does looking for volunteers also count?
As nobody else is stepping up, yes.
Okay. My name is Yong Kang Hee. I'm the new CNCF ambassador. So I come here to set up the Kubernetes Australia. So I'm actively looking for more volunteers. You could be our next speaker or just a volunteer like Arjen to help us organize the Kubernetes meetup. So right now I actively running the Kubernetes Singapore meetup. So we are actually growing very fast. So 6 months we got 1,200 plus members. So I guess Singapore, Melbourne, we are similar population, 5.5 million people. But I guess, you know, the Kubernetes community, I don't see we are more active like the rest of the countries. So that's why I set up the Kubernetes Australia. I want to make it the most active Kubernetes meetup group. So seriously, I'm actively looking for volunteers. We need sponsors, we need speakers. Okay, feel free to join us. Our first one will be 11th April at Red Hat. So our topics are mainly ROSA. Anyone never heard of ROSA? That's Red Hat OpenShift services on AWS. That's one of the most popular managed OpenShift versions. So that's one of the topics we will talk about ROSA, and then your day-to-day management. Similar like when you're running Amazon EKS. Day one, it's very simple. For Amazon, it does take like 20 minutes to spin up a EKS cluster. But what about you already have the EKS cluster. How to back them up, how to secure them, how to, you know, secure the containers. So what about my DR, my migration, all these. So that's the stuff we're going to cover in our, you know, first Kubernetes meetup. Thanks, Arjen, for giving me the opportunity. Thank you so much.
No, but nobody's hiring. Cool. Well, not cool, but you know. If you are looking for a job, I do recommend looking in the jobs channel of our Slack. As I said at the start, we generally do it the other way around here, just to make sure there's no conflicts between you and other people. But yeah, in our Slack, feel free to post on the jobs channel, hey, I'm looking for somebody. Oh, sorry, I'm looking for work, and hopefully somebody will jump on it or talk to the people here afterwards. But with that, I want to thank our sponsors, as always, our gold sponsors, CMD Solutions, as well as our silver sponsors, Versant and CIFO. And I still forgot to add NAP to this list as our venue sponsor, who I also deeply appreciate, despite the lack of a logo on this slide. With that, I want to thank you all for coming. Our next meetup will be right here on the 26th of April. I mentioned earlier, we're still looking for speakers, so if you have a talk, if you're not sure if you want to give a talk but have an idea, please reach out and we can go from there. Because without speakers, a meetup is just a very boring, empty space. So there is food left. As was very subtly shown, we can't leave the food here. Take it. It's there to be eaten. Yeah, it's great for lunch. Yep, can't be better than that. So again, thank you everybody, and we'll see you next month.